While vacationing on a yacht, a family found themselves in an extreme situation. Water from the oceans began to rapidly recede, leaving behind a desert. In the history of the planet, 5 such catastrophes have occurred, and this event signaled the onset of the 6th mass extinction on Earth. One day, oceanographer Tom, along with his wife Julia and their 2 children, Casey and Ben, set out on a sailing trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben were fishing and Casey was absorbed in her phone, Julia decided to go for a swim. But during her swim, something strange started to trouble her, as if something huge and dangerous was nearby, even though everything seemed calm around. Meanwhile, the instruments on the yacht began showing anomalous data, but Tom, focused on fishing, didn't pay attention. Julia felt worse and worse until she started drowning. She screamed, but the family didn't hear. The water around began to move strangely, as if something was pushing it away from the yacht. When the situation became critical, Tom finally heard his wife's cry, rushed to the helm, and steered the yacht toward Julia. He dived into the water and, with the help of the children, pulled her aboard, where they revived her. Tom was angry because he had always asked to be warned before she went into the water. Julia apologized, and the family soon forgot the incident, as they had a reason to celebrate. Ben was turning 13. Tom lit the candles on the cake and everyone congratulated Ben, who received gifts, while Casey took a group photo of the happy family. But suddenly, her boyfriend called. He asked her about the trip, and then, in the background, a sudden and very strong thunderstorm started. Casey grew worried, but her boyfriend assured her he was safe. However, the call abruptly cut off. Casey told her parents that a powerful storm had broken out on land. Suddenly, the family felt strange jolts. Everyone rushed to the deck to understand what was happening, and to their horror, saw giant whale bodies surfacing near the yacht. Tom, trying to calm everyone, explained that whales sometimes get off course, especially during storms, but this time the situation seemed much more dangerous. These huge creatures began pushing the yacht, creating a real threat. Tom decided to check what was happening underwater and jumped into the sea. After some time, he returned to the yacht with a cut on his shoulder from the yacht's propeller. Julia quickly stitched up his wound, and he explained that the whales could have collided with the yacht, possibly striking it with their tails, damaging the steering mechanism. Tom was concerned that they would hardly be able to continue their voyage. Later, Casey tried to re-establish contact with the outside world but found that neither the cell network nor the radio was working. It seemed the yacht was completely isolated. Tom began counting the fresh water supplies, which by his estimate would only last for days, but he was confident that the yacht was still on a shipping route, and sooner or later they would be found. However, strange and unsettling sounds could be heard outside. When they went to the deck, the family saw unknown glowing objects falling from the sky. These objects were getting closer and closer to the yacht. In an attempt to avoid a collision, Tom took a risk and started the engine. He managed to steer the vessel away from one of the falling objects, but soon the engine finally broke down. When the next object fell very close, the family managed to see that they weren't meteorites at all. They were artificial satellites of the Earth, falling from the sky. A strong wind picked up outside, and the yacht's instruments began malfunctioning, displaying abnormal readings. Frightened, everyone hid inside the vessel, which was now being violently rocked by the waves. Putting on life jackets, they prepared for the worst when suddenly, a strange ringing sound filled the air, causing blood to flow from their noses and a wave of nausea to hit them. Tom desperately tries to contact someone via radio, but all attempts remain unsuccessful. The night passes in tension and fear, and by morning, they are relieved to find themselves alive. However, their joy is soon replaced by shock. A massive hole gapes in the hull of the yacht, and it's completely unclear how the vessel hasn't sunk yet. The family steps outside and freezes in astonishment. There is no longer a drop of water around. The yacht is stranded on a rocky elevation, surrounded by a desert that was once the ocean floor. Tom tries to reassure the family, insisting that not all people could have perished. He takes out a compass and notices something strange. The instrument is showing the wrong direction, and he realizes that the magnetic poles of the planet have shifted. This had happened before in the distant past. Based on this, Tom concludes that the sea has moved to where the land used to be, and most people likely did not survive this catastrophic event. Casey, shaken by the news, can't handle the shock and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia, trying to distract herself from the horrible thoughts, takes stock of the remaining food supplies, while Ben decides to release a bundle of colorful balloons into the sky, hoping that any survivors might see them and come to their rescue. Tom, still holding on to hope, turns the radio on again and sends out a distress signal. To his surprise, this time he gets a response from a captain of a small submersible named Now. They had been deep underwater when the catastrophe struck, which allowed them to survive. However, as the captain explains, all the systems on the submersible have failed, and counting on help in these conditions is pointless. The captain warns Tom that, according to his calculations, the sea will return within a week, but it will be a very dangerous return, with powerful surges of water and destructive waves. He advises the family to find high ground as soon as possible and prepare for that moment. Julia instructs the children to pack their belongings. Tom asks the captain if he can take their children and at least save their lives. The captain regretfully explains that the submersible is too small and can only take one person. However, after much persuasion from Tom, the captain agrees to take both children and gives them his coordinates. Tom promises that they will reach the designated spot within a few days. The next morning, the family is almost ready to set out. Tom steps onto the deck and is surprised to see a stranger with a dog approaching in the distance. He greets the man and walks toward him, discovering that the man is injured. Tom offers him water, which the stranger greedily drinks, but suddenly, the man strikes Tom in the face. Julia sees this and rushes to her husband's aid. At the moment when the stranger thrusts a homemade spear into Tom's chest, the dog prevents Julia from getting close to him. Realizing that there's no saving her husband, Julia panics and runs back to the yacht. The man starts chasing Julie and wounds her in the arm. Despite this, she manages to climb back onto the deck with difficulty. Her screams are heard by the children, and they rush to help her. The three of them quickly barricade themselves in the cabin, trying to buy some time. Julia swiftly hides Casey and Ben in a safe spot, handing her daughter a flare gun with strict instructions to use it only in an emergency. Meanwhile, the stranger, trying to break in, forcefully kicks the door down. Julia hides in the bathroom, trying to quickly bandage her wound. When the intruder gets on the yacht, his first stop is the kitchen, where he grabs whatever food he can find. He's clearly starving. Holding a can of food, he starts searching the yacht for other supplies. Meanwhile, Julia, armed with a kitchen knife, prepares to defend herself. The man soon enters the cabin, but Julia nimbly jumps overboard, hiding under the yacht and trying not to give herself away. He tries to find her, peering through the hole in the hull, but he doesn't see her. Soon the dog appears and suddenly lunges at Julia, forcing her to defend herself by killing the animal. Hearing his dog whimper, the stranger rushes outside and finds it lying on the ground. During this time, Julia manages to climb back onto the yacht through a porthole on the other side, but she ends up right in the arms of the pursuer. He suddenly knocks her down, throws her onto the couch and starts strangling her, squeezing her throat tightly. At that moment, Casey sees what's happening and realizes this is her only chance to save her mother. She steps out of hiding and shoots the man with the flare gun. He is thrown back by the impact. The flare hits the deck, and a fire breaks out on the yacht. Julia quickly orders the children to run while she heads inside. However, it turns out that the man is only wounded, and he tries to attack her again. Julia kicks him away, grabs her belongings, and jumps overboard. Meanwhile, Ben finds his father's body. Casey, seeing this, rushes to him and cries. Julia runs to her husband to kiss him one last time, and their attention is drawn to the pursuer, who leaps from the burning yacht. The vessel explodes behind them, and the family starts running across the desert. They find shelter in a rocky canyon where a stream flows, but the water turns out to be salty and undrinkable. Casey shares the last of their water with Ben, but he refuses to drink, feeling guilty about what happened. He believes the killer came after seeing the balloons he had released. Casey shares this feeling, but Julia silences her, protecting her son, explaining that he couldn't have foreseen such consequences. Julia tells the children to gather their strength, as they have a long journey ahead. At that moment, she spots the figure of the same man, still pursuing them. The family immediately moves on. In the evening, Ben finds a hammerhead shark's carcass and tries to butcher it for food. But Julia once again sees the pursuer approaching and commands the children to run urgently. After some time, they stumble upon a vast field littered with old barrels of toxic waste, once submerged underwater. Despite the obvious risk of contamination, Julia decides not to stop, urging the children forward, as the pursuer is relentlessly following them. The family continues trekking along the ocean floor, navigating through heaps of plastic debris. Julia notices that Ben is losing strength and suffering from dehydration. Casey breaks down, convinced that there's no hope for survival, but her mother is determined to get them to the submersible. Eventually, they come across the remnants of an airplane that once crashed into the ocean. The family climbs into the wreckage to rest. Inside, Julia pulls out the last photo of them all together and tells the children the story of how she met their father. It was at a hospital when Tom was brought in after a failed scuba dive. The children, crying, remember their father and say their goodbyes to him. At night, Casey wakes up to a strange noise and steps outside. Seeing the figure of the killer approaching, she quietly sits near the plane, pretending not to notice, playing the role of bait. As the attacker gets close and prepares to grab her, Julia suddenly leaps at him and mercilessly finishes him off. At dawn, the family prepares to continue their journey, but as they are about to leave, they are horrified to find that only bones remain of the stranger's body. This means there is something far more dangerous in the desert than a human. Realizing they need to hurry, They continue moving forward. Julia checks their direction on the map when suddenly Ben breaks away and runs toward a puddle of salty water nearby. Julia shouts for him to stop, but the boy manages to take a few gulps before she pulls him away. Soon he starts feeling unwell and loses strength. They keep moving until they find several plastic chairs, which they use to build an improvised shelter from the scorching sun, trying to rest. Suddenly, Julia hears strange noises and steps outside to check the surroundings. What she sees prompts her to wake the children and flee the area as quickly as possible. After some time they spot a huge ship ahead, surrounded by scattered containers. A few people are wandering nearby. Julia shouts hoping for help, but when the people see giant crabs approaching, they quickly hide in a container, closing the doors behind them, ignoring the family's pleas. Julia and the children decide to climb onto one of the containers to save themselves. However, during the climb, the giant crabs manage to injure Julia's leg, making it difficult for her to move. Once on top, they watch as the crabs break into the container through a small crack in the door. The people inside try to fight them off by shooting, but their efforts are futile and soon the crabs mercilessly attack everyone. Due to her injury, Julia feels unwell, ties a scarf around her leg, and soon passes out. In the morning, she wakes up alone, startled by the strong wind and realizes with horror that the children are gone. She starts calling for them desperately, soon discovering that the crabs have left and the children have climbed down from the container in search of food and weapons. Taking advantage of the moment, Julia cauterizes her wound to prevent infection, while Ben examines the supplies they found. Searching the containers, they discover a small amount of food and water. In the pocket of one of the deceased victims, Julia finds a radio and immediately contacts Captain Now. He explains that he too was attacked by giant arthropods that emerged from the depths, adding that the seawater will return soon, which is what caused the appearance of these creatures. Julia begs Now to help save her children, but they have lost the map and don't know where to go. The captain then fires a flare, pointing them in the right direction. Den spots the signal and the family hurries in that direction. After some time, they see a yellow submarine in the distance, but reaching it proves challenging due to the uneven terrain of the former ocean floor. Casey is worried that her mother only talks about saving the children. Julia doesn't respond to her daughter's questions, urging the family to move faster. They have to make their way through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. In one section, a rock slide occurs, separating Julia from the children. She orders them to continue without her, but when Casey refuses to leave her, Julia asks her daughter to take care of Ben and save him. Casey and Ben make it out of the canyon and reach the submersible, but it's empty. Suddenly Now appears from behind the sub, badly injured. He admits that he has no chance of survival and insists that the children get inside the sub. However, Casey decides to return for her mother. Meanwhile, Julia is fighting off the attacking crabs with almost no bullets left when Casey climbs up the rocky barrier and extends her hand to her. They manage to run back to the sub and climb on top just as Now is killed by the claws of the monstrous crabs. The family takes refuge inside the sub as a giant ocean wave appears over the hill. The water swiftly sweeps up the sub, tossing it against the rocks, and all the horrors they've endured over the past few days flash before Julia's eyes. When she regains consciousness, she realizes the vessel is now resting calmly. Opening the hatch and stepping outside, they discover that the wave has carried them into a destroyed city, now completely submerged in water. At this thrilling moment, the movie unfortunately ends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any new videos.